I left home at 4:11 a.m. on a Tuesday, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and 22 years of suppressed rage. My brother got a car for graduating college. I got a bill for rent. That night, as my family celebrated Rowan's success with champagne and congratulations, my father looked me dead in the eye and demanded $800 a month to keep living in the house where I'd been invisible my entire life. They expected me to smile, nod, and pay up like the good little doormat I'd always been. Instead, I wrote them a letter, not goodbye, but a receipt for everything they'd taken from me, and vanished before sunrise. They thought they knew who Vivienne Hawthorn was, the overlooked daughter, the family disappointment, the one who'd always bend until she broke. They were about to learn they'd been dead wrong about all of it. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. I should have known something was wrong when my mother asked me to set the good china for Sunday dinner. The Hawthorn family only used the good china for two occasions, Christmas and when someone was about to get bad news. My name is Vivienne Hawthorn, and I was 22 years old when my world cracked open like an egg hitting concrete. But the cracks had been forming for years, hairline fractures in what everyone believed was a perfect family portrait. Growing up in the Hawthorn house meant learning to read between the lines. My father, Dean, spoke in commands disguised as suggestions. My mother, Marla, perfected the art of saying everything while saying nothing at all. And my brother Rowan? Well, Rowan was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he did everything wrong. I remember the first time I truly understood how different Rowan and I were in our parents' eyes. I was 14, Rowan was 16. He had taken Dad's BMW for a joyride with his friends and crashed it into the Hendersons' mailbox 3 blocks away. When Dad found out, he didn't yell at Rowan. Instead, he turned to me with those cold gray eyes and said, "Why didn't you tell me he was planning this? You knew, didn't you?" I hadn't known. I was in my room doing homework like always. But somehow, Rowan's mistake became my fault for not preventing it. That was the first rule I learned in the Hawthorn house. When Rowan messed up, everyone else was responsible for not stopping him. The second rule I learned was that appearances mattered more than truth. While I worked 2 part-time jobs and took online classes to save money, Rowan lived in a dorm at the state university, his tuition paid in full by Mom and Dad. When neighbors asked about us, Mom would beam and say, "Rowan's studying business, and Vivienne is taking her time to figure things out." Taking my time. As if working 60 hours a week while earning my degree was some kind of luxury vacation. The third rule was the cruelest. Love was conditional, and I hadn't met the conditions. By the time Rowan's graduation approached, I had perfected the art of being invisible. I kept my head down, my grades up, and my dreams small enough to fit in the cramped corner of our house that I called home. I had started a small online business selling handmade jewelry, nothing fancy, but it was mine. When I mentioned it at dinner one evening, Dad looked at me over his reading glasses and smirked. "Still playing pretend with books and crafts, I see. When are you going to get serious about your future, Vivienne?" I wanted to tell him that I was serious. I wanted to show him my business plan, my customer reviews, my growing savings account. But Rowan chose that moment to announce he had been selected for the dean's list, and just like that, the conversation shifted away from me. It always did. The Sunday dinner that changed everything started like all the others. Rowan sat at Dad's right hand, regaling us with stories from his senior year. Mom hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and laughing at his jokes. I sat across from them, cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces, wondering if anyone would notice if I just stopped showing up to these performances. "So, Rowan," Dad said, setting down his wine glass with ceremony, "your mother and I have been discussing your graduation present." Rowan's eyes lit up. "You didn't have to get me anything, Dad. The diploma is gift enough." But his voice carried that tone of anticipation that meant he absolutely expected something, and something big. Mom clasped her hands together like she was watching a proposal. "Oh, Dean, should we tell him now?" "Why not?" "Rowan's son, we're giving you the Camry, but not the old one. We bought you a brand new one. Pearl white, leather interior, the works." The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against my plate. A new car. A brand new car for Rowan, who had crashed Dad's BMW, who had gotten 3 speeding tickets in the past year, who had never held a job in his life. Wow, Dad, I thank you. Thank you so much. Rowan's voice cracked with genuine emotion, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who built blanket forts with me and shared his Halloween candy. You've earned it, son. 4 years of hard work, graduating with honors. We're proud of you. I cleared my throat. That's really wonderful, Rowan. Congratulations. And I meant it. Despite everything, I was happy for my brother. But I couldn't help asking, so, what happens to the old Camry? Dad and Mom exchanged a look. One of those married couple telepathic conversations that happen in the space between heartbeats. Well, Vivienne, Mom said carefully, we've been meaning to talk to you about that. Now that Rowan's graduating, and you're not living at home much longer. What do you mean? I asked, though a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. Dad leaned back in his chair, assuming his boardroom posture. You're 22 years old, Vivienne. It's time you started contributing more to this household. We've decided you need to start paying rent. $800 a month, due the first Sunday of every month. The room went silent except for the tick of Mom's antique clock on the mantel. $800. That was more than half of what I made from both my jobs combined. I don't understand, I said quietly. Rowan lived here for free until he was 22. He never paid rent during summers or winter breaks. Rowan was in college, Dad said, as if that explained everything. I'm in college too. I'm getting my degree online. That's different and you know it. Online courses aren't the same as a real college experience. Besides, Rowan was focused on his studies. You're working, which means you can afford to contribute. The logic was so twisted it made my head spin. I was being punished for working, for being responsible, for trying to make something of myself without their help. When do you need this to start? I asked. Next Sunday. First payment. And, Vivienne? Dad's voice carried that edge that meant the conversation was over. This is how it's going to be. I looked at Mom, hoping for some sign of support, some acknowledgement that this was unfair. She was studying her manicure intently, her lips pressed into a thin line. You won't find this strange at all? I asked her directly. She finally looked up, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something like regret in her eyes. But then she straightened her shoulders and said, Your father is right, sweetheart. It's time for you to grow up. Rowan hadn't said a word during this entire exchange. When I looked at him, he was staring at his hands, but there was something in his expression that looked almost like smugness. Or maybe that was just my imagination, colored by hurt and anger. $800, I repeated. Next Sunday. That's right, Dad said. He picked up his wine glass and held it high. A toast to new beginnings. To Rowan's bright future, and to Vivienne's newfound responsibility. They clinked glasses while I sat there, my world quietly imploding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and storm out. I wanted to tell them exactly what I thought of their twisted logic and cruel favoritism. Instead, I did what I had always done in the Hawthorn house. I smiled politely, excused myself to clear the dishes, and said nothing at all. But as I stood at the kitchen sink, washing the good china by hand while my family laughed in the dining room, something inside me shifted. A quiet voice in my head said, You don't have to live like this. I had always been the good daughter, the one who didn't make waves, who absorbed every slight and unfairness without complaint. But standing there with dishwater up to my wrists and my brother's laughter echoing from the next room, I realized that being good had gotten me nowhere except trapped. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, doing math in my head. $800 for rent, plus my other expenses, minus my income from both jobs. The numbers didn't work. Even if I picked up extra shifts, even if I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary, I couldn't make it work and still save money for my future. Unless I made a different choice entirely. I had never been the dramatic type. I wasn't the sister who slammed doors or had screaming matches or threatened to run away. But as the clock struck midnight and I listened to the house settle around me, I began to plan. Monday morning came with the artificial cheerfulness that Marla Hawthorn wore like expensive perfume. She hummed while making coffee, kissed Dad goodbye at the door, and reminded me that we needed to sit down and work out the details of my new financial arrangement. I nodded and agreed and played the role of the dutiful daughter for 6 more days. But inside, I was methodically planning my disappearance. I started with the practical things. I researched Greyhound schedules and ticket prices. I calculated exactly how much money I had saved and how far it could take me. I made a list of everything I owned that actually mattered to me, and I was surprised by how short it was. The most important items weren't things at all, but rather what they represented. My laptop, which contained my business files, and the beginning of my real life. A small jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, which I kept hidden in the back of my closet. And most significantly, a set of leather-bound journals that had also belonged to my grandmother, Vivienne Hawthorn. Everyone assumed those journals had been lost after Grandma Evelyn died 3 years ago. Dad had made a big show of looking for them, claiming they contained important family history that should go to Rowan as the eldest grandchild. But I had found them first, tucked away in a trunk in her attic, and something told me to keep them hidden. I had never read them completely, but I knew they contained more than just family history. There were newspaper clippings, legal documents, and what looked like financial records tucked between the pages. Tuesday, I worked both my jobs as usual. At the bookstore, I helped customers find romance novels and pretended everything was normal. At the restaurant, I served tables and smiled until my face hurt. But every free moment, I was making lists and plans. Wednesday, I started packing. Not obviously, just gradually moving my most important belongings into a large duffel bag that I kept under my bed. T-shirts, jeans, underwear, my laptop charger, the jewelry box, the journals. Everything that made me who I was, reduced to what could fit in one bag. Thursday, I wrote the letter. I had started and stopped a dozen different versions. Angry letters full of accusations. Sad letters begging for understanding. But in the end, I wrote something that was purely, simply true. I wrote a ledger. Dear family, it began, and then I listed everything. Every time I had covered for Rowan. Every family event where I had been ignored or dismissed. Every sacrifice I had made to keep the peace. Every dollar I had spent on family gifts while wearing secondhand clothes. Every dream I had mentioned that had been laughed off or ignored. But it wasn't written in anger. It was written like a business report, factual and clear. At the bottom, I included a simple calculation: how much money I had contributed to the household over the years through gifts, groceries I had bought, bills I had helped pay when money was tight. The number was larger than I had expected. I ended the letter with one line: "You won't find me unless I want to be found." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Friday, I gave my notice at both jobs. I told them I was transferring schools and moving away for family reasons. My managers were sorry to see me go, which was more recognition than I had gotten at home in months. Saturday, I couldn't eat. I pushed food around on my plate at dinner while Rowan talked about his graduation ceremony and his job interviews. Dad was in an expansive mood, giving advice about salary negotiation and career advancement. Mom asked if I wanted to come shopping with her for a new dress for Rowan's graduation. "I can't," I said. "I have to work." "Of course you do," Dad said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Work, work, work. That's all you ever do, Vivienne. You should try having some fun occasionally." If he only knew that in less than 12 hours, I would be gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my family settling in for the night. Dad snoring from down the hall. Mom's late-night television program playing softly. Rowan's music seeping through the thin walls. At 3:30 a.m., I got dressed. Jeans, comfortable shoes, a sweatshirt with a hood. I shouldered my duffel bag and took one last look around my room. It had never really felt like mine anyway. The walls were still painted the pale pink Mom had chosen when I was 7, and most of the furniture was hand-me-downs from other family members. There was nothing here that would miss me. I crept downstairs in the dark, avoiding the third step that always creaked and the loose floorboard by the kitchen door. In the dim light from the street lamps, I left my letter on the kitchen table where Mom would find it with her morning coffee. Then I walked out the front door and never looked back. The bus station was nearly empty at 4:11 a.m. Just me, a tired-looking security guard, and a woman with two small children who kept looking at the clock and checking her phone. I bought a ticket to a city 4 states away, paid in cash, and settled into wait. As the bus pulled out of the station, I watched my hometown disappear in the dark windows. I should have felt scared. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. I had planned my destination carefully. Helena Morrison lived in a mid-sized college town where I could blend in easily. She was my godmother, though I hadn't seen her since I was a child. More importantly, she was someone Dad couldn't manipulate or intimidate. Helena had been Grandma Evelyn's best friend, and from what I remembered, she was fierce and independent in ways that made Dad uncomfortable. There had been some kind of falling out between Helena and my parents when I was about 10. Something about the family estate and inheritance, though I had never been told the details. All I knew was that Helena's name was no longer mentioned in the Hawthorn house, which made her exactly the right person to call. The bus ride took 11 hours, with stops in small towns whose names I didn't recognize. I dozed fitfully, leaning against the window and watching farmland roll by. Somewhere around hour 6, I turned on my phone long enough to send a single text message to Helena. "This is Vivienne Hawthorn. I'm on my way to see you. I'll explain when I get there." Then I turned the phone back off. I didn't want to see the inevitable calls and messages from home. Not yet. Helena was waiting for me at the bus station, even though I hadn't told her which bus I was taking. She looked exactly like I remembered, only older. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly.
"Vivienne," she said simply.
"You look like hell." "Hello, Helena. I'm sorry to show up like this." "No, you're not. And you shouldn't be. Come on, let's get you home." Helena's house was everything the Hawthorn house wasn't. Warm and cluttered and alive, filled with books and plants and art that had been chosen for love rather than status. She made me tea and toast, and didn't ask any questions until I was ready to talk. When I finally told her about the rent demand and my decision to leave, Helena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your father," she said finally, "has always been a manipulative bastard. I'm sorry it took you this long to see it." "You really don't like him, do you?" Helena laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Like him? Child, I despised him from the moment he married your mother. But that's a story for another day. Right now, you need to rest and figure out what comes next." She showed me to a small bedroom on the second floor, sun-bright and smelling faintly of lavender. "Stay as long as you need to," she said. "But I have one rule. No hiding. You left that house to start living your life, so that's what you're going to do." I fell asleep that afternoon and didn't wake up until the next morning. For the first time in years, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, like someone who didn't have anything to be afraid of. 3 days after I disappeared from the Hawthorn house, Helena took me to the town square for coffee and what she called a proper conversation about your future. The coffee shop was called the Book Nook, a combination bookstore and cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old paper. Helena seemed to know everyone who worked there, and within an hour, I had a job interview scheduled with the owner, a woman named Margaret who wore paint-splattered aprons and had kind eyes. "We need someone who can handle the register and help customers find what they're looking for," Margaret explained. "It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and we're like family here." Family. The word had taken on new meanings since I'd left home. As I looked around the cozy shop, watching customers browse peacefully and employees chat easily with each other, I realized this felt more like family than anything I'd experienced in the Hawthorn house. That evening, Helena made dinner while I sat at her kitchen table with my grandmother's journals spread out in front of me. I've been afraid to read them before, not sure I wanted to know what family secrets they might contain. But distance had given me perspective, and I was finally ready for the truth. "Find anything interesting?" Helena asked, glancing over my shoulder. "I'm not sure yet. There are a lot of financial documents mixed in with her regular entries." Bank statements, legal papers, things I don't really understand. Helena set down her wooden spoon and came to sit beside me. May I? I pushed one of the journals toward her. She opened it carefully, running her fingers over my grandmother's neat handwriting. Your grandmother was a meticulous record keeper, Helena said. She documented everything, especially after your grandfather died. She didn't trust. She stopped abruptly. Didn't trust what? Helena was quiet for a moment, weighing her words. Your grandmother didn't trust your father, Vivienne. She never did. And she had good reason. Over the next hour, Helena told me things about my family that I had never known. How Dad had married Mom not for love, but because the Hawthorn name carried weight in business circles. How he had gradually gained control over the family's finances and real estate holdings. How my grandmother had become increasingly concerned about his influence over family decisions. But the most important thing, Helena said, pulling out a legal document from between the journal pages, is this. It was a trust document, dated 3 years ago. I recognized my grandmother's signature at the bottom, along with an official seal. But the beneficiary name made my breath catch. Vivienne Rose Hawthorn.
Me.
I don't understand, I said, reading through the legal language. This says I inherited a substantial trust fund when I turned 21. But I never received anything. Helena's expression was grim. That's because your father had the document altered. Your grandmother set up this trust specifically for you, to ensure you'd have financial independence. But Dean managed to get power of attorney when you were hospitalized that time during your senior year. When I had my breakdown, I finished quietly. It had been the darkest period of my life, struggling with depression and anxiety while trying to keep up with school and work. I had spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility, getting the help I needed to stabilize my mental health. He used that power of attorney to redirect the trust funds. Legally, it was theft, but he did it cleverly enough that it looked legitimate on paper. I stared at the document in my hands. How much money are we talking about? Enough to pay for your college education, start a business, buy a house. Enough to ensure you'd never have to depend on anyone else. Helena's voice was bitter. Your grandmother knew exactly what kind of man your father was, and she wanted to protect you from him. The room seemed to spin around me. All those years of working multiple jobs, of scraping together money for textbooks and car repairs, of listening to Dad's lectures about financial responsibility, and there had been money that was rightfully mine, money that could have changed everything. There's more, Helena said gently. She pulled out another document, this one more recent. I think your brother might have been involved too. It was a college enrollment form with my signature at the bottom. Except I had never seen this form before in my life. This authorized the transfer of education savings from your account to Rowan's tuition payments, Helena explained. The signature looks like yours, but it's not mine. I examined the signature closely. It was similar to my handwriting, but the loops were slightly different, the pressure uneven. Rowan used to practice copying my signature when we were kids. He thought it was funny. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Dad had done. Rowan knew. He had to have known that he was using money that belonged to me, money that our grandmother had specifically set aside for my future. Helena reached across the table and squeezed my hand.
I'm sorry, sweetheart.
I know this is a lot to process. What can I do about it? I asked. Is there any way to get the money back? There might be. I know a lawyer who specializes in these kinds of cases. His name is Archer Delaney, and he's helped other families dealing with financial abuse and fraud. But it won't be easy, and it won't be quick. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I had felt guilty for not being able to contribute more to family expenses, all the times I had wondered if I was lazy or unmotivated because I couldn't seem to get ahead financially. The truth was that I had been sabotaged from the beginning. But alongside the anger and hurt, I felt something else. Determination. For the first time in my life, I had a clear enemy to fight against. Not my own inadequacy or bad luck, but deliberate, calculated theft. The next morning, Helena drove me to Archer Delaney's office. He was younger than I had expected, maybe in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of calm demeanor that made you feel immediately trusted. Cases like this are more common than you'd think, he told me after reviewing the documents. Family members with power of attorney often abuse that authority, especially when there are significant assets involved. The good news is that we have solid documentation. Your grandmother was very thorough. What's the bad news? I asked. It's going to take time, and your family isn't going to like it. Are you prepared for them to fight back? I thought about Dad's cold gray eyes and his talent for making people feel small. I thought about Mom's passive-aggressive comments and her ability to twist any situation to make herself the victim. I thought about Rowan's smirk at Sunday dinner when Dad had demanded rent money. Let them fight, I said. I'm not backing down this time. Archer smiled.
Good.
Helena told me you had backbone. Let's get started. Over the next week, while I settled into my new job at the Book Nook and tried to build some kind of normal routine, Archer began the legal process of investigating the trust fraud. He filed paperwork, requested bank records, and sent official notices to all the parties involved. Meanwhile, I started getting messages on my phone. First from Mom, pleading and worried. Vivienne, please call us.
We're so worried about you.
Whatever's wrong, we can work it out. Then from Dad, authoritative and demanding. This childish behavior needs to stop immediately. You're embarrassing the family. Come home now, and we'll forget this whole thing. Finally from Rowan. Viv, what the hell? Mom's crying all the time, and Dad's furious. What did you say in that letter? Just call me back, okay? I didn't respond to any of them. But I did watch from a distance as my disappearance began to affect their carefully constructed world. Mom posted on social media asking if anyone had seen me, describing it as an urgent family matter. Dad started calling my former co-workers and friends, trying to track me down. The most interesting development came when Rowan got arrested for drunk driving. Helena showed me the news article online. Local college graduate arrested for DUI. There was Rowan's mugshot, looking young and scared, and nothing like the golden boy who had sat at Dad's right hand. Interesting timing, Helena observed. Sounds like the family is falling apart without you there to be the scapegoat. She was right. For years, I had absorbed all the family's dysfunction, smoothing over conflicts and taking blame that didn't belong to me. Without me there to serve that function, the cracks in their foundation were starting to show. But I wasn't ready to feel victorious yet. There was still too much work to do, too many secrets to uncover, too many wrongs to make right. 2 weeks after I had left home, a woman contacted me through my old social media account. Her name was Nadine, and she said she was Rowan's ex-girlfriend from college. I know this is weird, her message read, but I heard your family is looking for you, and I thought you should know some things about your brother. Can we meet somewhere private? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the next town over. Nadine was a petite brunette with intelligent eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of a bird ready to take flight. I dated Rowan for about 6 months last year, she explained, stirring her latte absently. He talked about you sometimes. He felt guilty about something involving money that was supposed to be yours. Did he say what specifically? Not exactly, but he drank a lot when he felt guilty, and he talked more when he drank. One night, he said something about how your dad had made him sign papers that he didn't really understand, but that it meant your college money went to his tuition instead. My heart pounded. Did he say anything else? Nadine pulled out her phone. I recorded some of our conversations. I know that sounds terrible, but Rowan could be manipulative. I started recording things to keep track of what was true and what wasn't. She hesitated. There's something on here I think you need to hear. She played the recording. Rowan's voice was slurred with alcohol, but his words were clear enough. Dad says family money should go to family success, and I'm the success story. But Vivienne works so hard, Nadine. She works harder than I ever did. Sometimes I think about telling her, but Dad would kill me. He says she's not ready for that kind of responsibility, that she'd just waste it anyway. But I know that's not true. I know she'd do something amazing with it. I closed my eyes, listening to my brother's voice admitting that he knew he had stolen from me, that he knew it was wrong, but that he was too much of a coward to make it right. I'm sorry, Nadine said softly. I know that's hard to hear. Thank you for telling me, I said. Can I have a copy of that recording? She nodded and transferred the file to my phone. For what it's worth, I think Rowan really does love you. He's just weak, and your father is very good at manipulation. As I drove back to Helena's house, I thought about weakness and strength, about the choices we make when we're afraid, and about the price of staying silent in the face of injustice. I had been weak once too, accepting every slight and betrayal because it was easier than fighting back. But that version of myself felt like a stranger now. The woman driving down this country road, armed with evidence and determination, was someone new. Someone who wouldn't disappear quietly into the background anymore. Someone who was finally ready to fight. 3 weeks after Nadine gave me the recordings, Archer called with news that would change everything. The legal case had moved faster than expected, and Dean Hawthorn was about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. "I've filed the official complaint for trust fraud and financial abuse," Archer told me over the phone. "The court has approved our request for asset freezing pending investigation. Your father will be served papers this afternoon." I was shelving books at the book nook when the call came, and I had to sit down on a stepladder to process what he was saying. After years of feeling powerless, watching the legal system swing into action on my behalf felt surreal. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means his access to the trust funds is cut off immediately. No more transfers, no more withdrawals. And he'll have to appear in court to explain how he obtained power of attorney and why he redirected money that was legally designated for you." That evening, Helena and I sat on her front porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sunset and waiting. We both knew that Dean would react quickly and dramatically to being served legal papers. The only question was how. The answer came at 9:47 p.m. when my phone rang with a call from an unknown local number. "Miss Hawthorn? This is Officer Bradley with the County Sheriff's Department. We have a Rowan Hawthorn in custody, and he's asking us to call you." My stomach dropped. What happened? DUI, possession of controlled substances, and destruction of public property. He drove his vehicle through the front window of Morrison's Hardware downtown. No one was injured, but he's asking to speak with his sister. Helena drove me to the county jail in silence. I had imagined this moment many times since leaving home, seeing Rowan again, confronting him about what he had done. But I had pictured it happening on my terms, when I was ready, not like this. Rowan looked smaller than I remembered. He sat in the visiting room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame, his hair unwashed and his eyes red-rimmed. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Viv, thank God. I didn't know who else to call." "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked, sitting across from him at the metal table. "Dad refused to come. Said I made my bed, and now I have to lie in it. Mom wanted to, but Dad wouldn't let her." Rowan's voice was hoarse. "They're fighting all the time now. Ever since you left, and those lawyers started calling. The lawyers are calling because Dad stole money that belonged to me. Money that Grandma Evelyn left specifically for my future." Rowan looked down at his hands. "I know.
Do you?
Do you really know, Rowan? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been perfectly happy to benefit from that theft for years. You think I wanted this?" He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "You think I wanted to live with the guilt of knowing that every semester of college, every meal in the dining hall, every textbook I bought was paid for with money that should have been yours?" I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of deception. But all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. "Then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you stop it?" "Because I was a coward. Because Dad made it seem like it was for the best, like you weren't ready for that kind of responsibility. Because I told myself that if I just worked hard enough, got good enough grades, became successful enough, then maybe I could make it right somehow." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "But I never could make it right. And every day it got harder to tell the truth." I wanted to stay angry at him. Anger felt safer than the complicated mix of love and betrayal and pity that was washing over me. But looking at my brother, really looking at him, I could see that he had been trapped too, just in a different way. I never wanted the car, Viv. I didn't even want to go to college. I wanted to learn carpentry, maybe start my own construction business. But Dad had it all planned out. Business degree, corporate job, carrying on the family name. And every time I tried to push back, he'd remind me how much money he was investing in my future. Money that wasn't his to invest. I know that now. I've known it for a while. That's why I started drinking so much. That's why I couldn't hold down any of the jobs Dad got me. How do you build a life on a foundation of lies? We sat in silence for a moment. Through the small window, I could see police cars coming and going in the parking lot, and I thought about how many families were probably having conversations like this one, trying to sort truth from lies, love from manipulation. What happens now? Rowan asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices. And so does Dad. Are you going to be okay? I mean, do you have somewhere to live, money to get by? Despite everything, I almost smiled. Even sitting in jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit, my brother was worried about me. I'm fine, Rowan. I'm better than fine, actually. I have a job I love, friends who care about me, and people who see my worth. Things I never had at home. I'm glad, he said, and I could tell he meant it. I'm glad you got out. When I left the jail that night, I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not complete closure, there was still too much unresolved, but the beginning of it. Rowan wasn't the villain I had built him up to be in my mind. He was just a weak person who had made bad choices, and now he was facing the consequences. The real villain was still sitting in the Hawthorn house, probably planning his next move. 2 days later, local news picked up Rowan's arrest. Prominent businessman's son arrested in downtown incident. The article was brief but damaging, mentioning Dad's position on several corporate boards and his involvement in local politics. Helena showed me the online comments, which ranged from sympathetic to savage. Poor kid, too much pressure from his family. Spoiled rich boy finally faces reality. Like father, like son, corruption runs in that family. That last comment proved to be prophetic. By the end of the week, Dad's legal troubles had cost him his position on the board of directors for Lakefield Industries, the largest employer in our hometown. The company released a statement about maintaining the highest ethical standards and the need for board members to model appropriate behavior. I found out about Dad's firing through Margaret at the bookshop, who heard it from a customer whose husband worked at Lakefield. Apparently, it wasn't just the legal case, Margaret told me as we unpacked a shipment of new novels. There were already questions about some of his business dealings. This just gave them the excuse they needed. That evening, as I was closing up the shop, my phone rang. Mom's number appeared on the screen, and after a moment of hesitation, I answered. Vivienne? Oh, thank God. Sweetheart, we need to talk. Mom's voice was different than I remembered. Smaller, more fragile. The confident social butterfly who had hosted dinner parties and charity luncheons was gone, replaced by someone who sounded lost and scared. Hello, Mom. Can we meet somewhere? Please? There are things you need to know, things I should have told you years ago. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a diner 2 towns over. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked older, thinner, like someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating well. You look good, she said when I sat down across from her. Healthy. Happy even. I am happy, Mom. For the first time in years. Mom nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm glad. I'm so glad. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small cardboard box. I brought you something. Things that should have been yours a long time ago. Inside the box were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. She wrote to you every month after she moved to the assisted living facility, Mom explained. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, just thinking of you notes. Dean said it would upset you to get them, that you were too busy with school and work to be bothered with an old woman's ramblings. I pulled out one of the letters at random. It was dated just 6 months before Grandma Evelyn died, and it was full of encouragement about my online classes and my small business, pride in my work ethic, and gentle questions about my dreams for the future. She knew about my business? I asked. She knew about everything. She kept track of you through Helena and through me when I was brave enough to tell her the truth. Mom's voice broke. She loved you so much, Vivienne. She was so proud of the woman you were becoming. The last letter in the box was different from the others. It was sealed and marked, to be opened only if Dean tries to take what is yours. With shaking hands, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My grandmother's words were clear and direct. My dearest Vivienne, if you are reading this, then my worst fears about your father have come true. Dean Hawthorn is not the man he pretends to be. He married your mother for her connections and her family's money, and he has spent 25 years systematically taking control of assets that were never his to control. The trust fund I established for you is only part of what he has stolen. There are property deeds, investment accounts, and business interests that rightfully belong to your mother, but Dean has manipulated her into signing them over to him. If he comes for your trust, fight him. You have every right to take back what was stolen from you. He is not who he pretends to be, and you are stronger than you know. I looked up at Mom, who was watching me with red-rimmed eyes. Did you know about this letter? Not the contents, but I knew she left instructions. And Vivienne, she was right. About all of it. I've been such a coward, such a fool. I let him convince me that I couldn't manage my own affairs, that I needed him to make all the financial decisions. But I've been meeting with a lawyer of my own, and I'm filing for divorce. Mom. No, let me finish. I failed you as a mother. I failed you as a parent. I stood by and watched while Dean undermined your confidence and stole your inheritance, and I told myself it was for the best because I was afraid to rock the boat. But I can't live with that anymore. I can't live with him anymore. We talked for 3 hours in that diner. Mom told me things I had never known about her marriage, about the slow erosion of her independence, about the ways Dean had isolated her from friends and family who might have questioned his control. She apologized over and over, and while her apologies couldn't undo 22 years of neglect and enablement, they were a start. When we finally said goodbye in the parking lot, Mom hugged me tighter than she had since I was a small child. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said, but I hope someday you might be willing to try again. On your terms this time. 6 weeks after I had left home, I finally returned. But I didn't go quietly, and I didn't go alone. The storm that brought me back was both literal and metaphorical. A late spring thunderstorm had knocked out power across 3 counties, and Helena's house had suffered minor roof damage. While we waited for the repair crew, I made a decision that had been building inside me for days. I need to go back, I told Helena as we watched rain pound against our kitchen windows. Not to stay, not to reconcile, but to finish this. Helena studied my face in the lamplight. Are you sure you're ready? I'll never be ready, but I'm strong enough now, and that's what matters. Archer agreed to meet us at the Hawthorn house. He brought copies of all the legal documents, financial records, and evidence we had gathered. Your father has been served with papers requiring him to appear in court next week, he explained as we sat in his car outside my childhood home. He knows his options are limited. The question is whether he'll accept a settlement or try to fight this publicly. The house looked smaller than I remembered and shabbier. The lawn needed cutting, and the flower beds that Mom had always tended so carefully were overgrown with weeds. Even in the storm, I could see that the place had the look of a home where people had stopped caring. I walked up to the front door and knocked. After a moment, I heard footsteps, and then Dean opened the door. He looked older, grayer, and there was something defeated in his posture that I had never seen before. But when he saw me, his eyes hardened with the familiar arrogance.
Well, well.
The prodigal daughter returns. Come to gloat. I came to talk, I said simply. May I come in? He stepped aside, and I walked into the house where I had spent the first 22 years of my life. It felt like visiting a museum of my own past, familiar but distant, full of memories that belonged to someone else. The living room was a mess. Newspapers and empty bottles scattered across the coffee table, takeout containers on the mantel where Mom's antiques used to sit. This was the home of a man who had lost control of his carefully constructed world. Your mother's not here, Dean said, settling into his recliner. She moved in with her sister while the lawyers sort out the divorce. I know. I've talked to her. Of course you have. Turned her against me too, didn't you? Just like you turned Helena against me all those years ago. I sat on the couch across from him. The same couch where I had done homework while listening to him praise Rowan's achievements. I didn't turn anyone against you, Dad. They saw who you really were and they made their own choices. Is that what you think happened? You think you're some kind of hero in this story? No, I said. I think I'm someone who finally learned to stand up for herself. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of documents. I know about the trust fund. I know about the forged signatures. I know about the power of attorney you abused when I was hospitalized. I know all of it. Dean glanced at the papers, but didn't reach for them. You don't know anything. You're a naive girl who's been manipulated by people who hate this family. This family? I almost laughed. Dad, there's no family anymore. Rowan is in rehab. Mom has filed for divorce. I'm never coming back. The only thing left is you, sitting in this house alone, surrounded by the wreckage of what you destroyed. For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been fear. Or regret. But then the arrogance returned. You want the money?
Fine.
Take it. See how far it gets you in the real world, where nobody cares about your feelings or your tender sensibilities. I don't want your money anymore, I said, and I meant it. I want you to sign a confession acknowledging what you did. I want you to make a public apology to Mom and to me. And I want you to get help, because whatever made you into this kind of person, it's not too late to change. Dean stared at me for a long moment. Then he started laughing, a bitter, broken sound that had no humor in it. Help? You think I need help? I'm the only one in this family who ever had any ambition, any drive to succeed. I built everything we had. I gave you all a good life, a comfortable life, and this is how you repay me. You built a lie, I said quietly, and you taught us all to live inside that lie. But lies don't last forever. I stood up to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. You were always the smart one, he said, and his tone was different now. Quieter, more honest. Smarter than Rowan, smarter than your mother. Probably smarter than me. I just didn't want to admit it. I turned back to look at him. He seemed to have shrunk into his chair, an old man confronting the ruins of his own making. Why? I asked. Why did you always make me feel like I wasn't enough? Because you were too much, he said. You had everything I'd always wanted: intelligence, integrity, the respect of people who mattered. And I was afraid that if I let you shine, everyone would see how dim I really was. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from him. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. I'm sorry you felt that way, I said. But that was your choice, and you have to live with the consequences. As I reached for the door handle, he spoke one more time. The house, he said. I'm signing it over to the women's shelter downtown. Your mother's idea. She said something good should come from this place. I nodded. That's a good choice. Helena was waiting in the car when I came out, and she could see from my face that the conversation hadn't gone as expected. How do you feel? She asked as we drove away. Sad, I admitted. And free. 3 months later, Dean signed the settlement agreement. He returned the trust fund money, acknowledged the fraud in writing, and agreed to community service in lieu of criminal charges. He also entered therapy, though I had no idea if it would help. But that was his journey to make, not mine. 2 years later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at the State University, looking out at 200 faces eager to hear what I had to say. The banner behind me read, "Finding Your Voice, a workshop on emotional and financial independence." My name is Vivienne Hawthorn, I began, and I want to tell you about the day I disappeared from my own life and how I found my way back to myself. The workshop was part of a series I had developed through the nonprofit organization I now ran, a legal aid and counseling center for young adults who had experienced financial abuse or emotional manipulation by family members. Helena and I had founded it together, with Archer as our legal advisor and Margaret from the Book Nook as our volunteer coordinator. We called it Second Chances, and in 2 years, we had helped nearly 300 people reclaim their lives and their rights. The seed money had come from my grandmother's trust fund, of course. But the Betrayal Foundation was built on the stories of people like me, people who had been told they weren't worth investing in, People who had learned to expect scraps instead of dignity, people who needed someone to believe in their potential. After the workshop, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes.
"Thank you," she said.
My parents took out credit cards in my name and destroyed my credit before I even turned 18. I thought I was stuck forever, but listening to you, maybe there's hope. There's always hope, I told her, handing her a card with our organization's information. And there are people who will help you fight for what's yours. These conversations happened after every workshop, every speaking engagement, every time I shared my story. And each time, I was reminded of why the difficult journey had been worth it. Rowan had been out of rehab for 8 months and was working as a carpenter's apprentice in a town about an hour away. We talked on the phone every few weeks, careful conversations where we were both learning how to be siblings without the toxic dynamics that had defined our childhood. He had written me a letter from rehab, a real apology that acknowledged his choices and their impact. He had also set up a payment plan to repay the education money he had used, even though I had told him it wasn't necessary. It's necessary for me, he had said. I need to make it right, even if it takes me years. Mom had moved to a small apartment near her sister and was slowly rebuilding her independence. She attended therapy twice a week and had started taking art classes, something she had given up when she married Dad. Our relationship was still fragile, built on tentative phone calls and careful visits, but it was honest in a way it had never been before. She had been the one to suggest donating the Hawthorn house to the women's shelter, turning it into transitional housing for women leaving abusive relationships. The irony wasn't lost on any of us, but it felt like the right kind of justice. As for Dad, I honestly didn't know how he was doing. We had no contact, and I had no plans to change that. Helena occasionally heard updates through mutual acquaintances. He was living in a small apartment, still in therapy, working part-time at a local hardware store. Whether he was genuinely changing or just going through the motions was between him and his conscience. The most surprising development in my new life was Elijah. I met him at the coffee shop where Helena and I often worked on grant applications for the nonprofit. He was a third-grade teacher who came in every Saturday morning to grade papers and plan lessons, always ordering the same thing: black coffee and a blueberry muffin. For weeks, we exchanged polite nods and small talk about the weather. Then one day, he complimented the book I was reading, a memoir about family trauma and healing, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. Elijah was gentle in a way that had nothing to do with weakness. He listened without trying to fix things, asked questions because he was genuinely curious, and never once made me feel like I needed to perform or pretend to be someone else. 6 months after we started dating, he asked me about my family and I told him the whole story. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said finally. "But I'm grateful it led you to become who you are now."
It was exactly the right thing to say.
On a warm Sunday afternoon in late spring, I found myself at Grandma Evelyn's grave for the first time since her funeral. I brought her letters, all of them, and read them aloud under the oak tree that shaded her headstone. "You were right about everything," I told her. "Dad wasn't who he pretended to be, but you were also right about me being stronger than I knew." A year later, my memoir was published, The Daughter Who Vanished. A story of family, money, and finding your worth became a bestseller, not because the story was particularly unique, but because it resonated with so many people who had experienced similar betrayals. The book tour was surreal, standing in bookstores across the country, talking to audiences about the worst and best moments of my life. But every event brought me new connections, new stories, new reminders that healing was possible and courage was contagious. The final stop on the tour was back home, at the Book Nook, where I had started rebuilding my life. Margaret introduced me to the packed audience, many of whom had known me when I was just the quiet girl who shelved books and made lattes. "I want to end tonight with something my grandmother wrote to me," I said, looking out at the familiar faces. "Sometimes disappearing is how we make ourselves seen." As I signed books afterward, I realized that the scared, invisible girl who had left this town 2 years ago was truly gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who used her voice, who had learned that the best revenge against people who try to diminish you is to shine so brightly that they can't ignore you anymore. That night, I drove past the old Hawthorn house. It had been transformed into something beautiful, warm lights in every window, a playground in the backyard, flower boxes blooming with color. A sign by the front door read Evelyn House, transitional housing for women and children. I parked across the street and watched families moving around inside, women who were starting over, children who were learning that homes could be safe spaces. My grandmother would have loved knowing that her name was associated with healing instead of harm. As I drove home to the little house I shared with Elijah, past the nonprofit office where we were changing lives one case at a time, past the coffee shop where Helena and I planned our next expansion, I thought about the note I had left on the kitchen table that night I disappeared. You won't find me unless I want to be found. I had meant it as a threat then, a way to maintain control in a situation where I felt powerless. But it turned out to be something else entirely. A promise to myself that I would never again be someone who could be lost, overlooked, or undervalued. I had found myself, and I was never disappearing again. What if the people who raised you were the very ones stealing your future? Sometimes disappearing is the only way to finally be seen. Like and subscribe for more stories of courage and transformation.